The short answer is yes, especially with the stabilizing rounds, as it literally carried me through the Nightfall GM while I was using it as my primary. The long answer is still yes, but there are obviously a couple of choices we can make to alter the weapon to our choosing. Let it all go by liking the video. So in terms of barrels, obviously it comes down to personal preference. A lot of people seem to like blast radius, in which case volatile launch would be pretty decent. Personally, I do kind of prefer velocity, so in my case, something like hard launch would be the better option. Quick launch is also pretty good. It's just plus 10 velocity and plus 10 handling. And smart drift control is kind of underrated because it's just, plus 5 velocity and then plus 10 stabilizing, plus 10 handling, plus 11 recoil direction. So it makes the gun feel a little bit better, and it completely runs out that recoil direction to 100 from 89, which is not too bad. If you want more blast radius or velocity, you do have your choices of implosion rounds, high explosive, ordnance, high velocity rounds. But your basics like a pin and mag or extended mag are probably more generally, fine. I'll get to the third column in just a bit, but I'm actually going to go ahead and skip to the fourth column, as the choices here are what matter a bit more and are what you're mainly looking for. So destabilizing rounds is the big one. That was the perk I was hearing about on this weapon, and that was basically the perk I was trying to roll for. Luckily, I got it fairly quickly in a normal Nightfall, and I did manage to get one in a Adept version as well. So destabilizing rounds, if hitting a target creates a void burst. Hitting other targets with this burst makes them volatile and grants you volatile rounds for a short duration. Weapon kills cause enemies to explode, applying volatile to enemies in a 6.5 meter radius around the target. If the explosion applied volatile to a nearby enemy, you gain volatile rounds for 4.5 seconds, 1.5 second cooldown between activations. So this perk basically allows you to chain kills together, and the void bursts, as you can witness, allow you to do a decent job at eye clear. The more defensive option is Withering Gaze. Aiming this weapon for a short period of time without firing grants the ability to weaken the next target. Timer resets after firing or when you stop aiming down sights. ADS for 1.5 seconds without firing causes your next direct hit to apply weaken. Timer starts as soon as ADS input is rest. So I think in the lower end content, this is kind of useless because it's like you really want to spend that time to weaken an enemy that probably won't even kill you. But in higher end content, especially like this GM Nightfall, being able to weaken an enemy, especially a high priority target, can definitely save your life and probably even your teammates' lives in multiple occasions. And so because both of these apply void debuffs, destabilizing, volatile, and withering gaze weaken, the obvious choice to pair it with is repulsor brace. Defeating a void debuff target grants an overshield. Kills against void debuff enemies grant a 45 health void overshield for 8 seconds. And if we take a quick look at the Destiny data compendium, void overshield has 70% damage resist against combatants. So not only is it a 45 HP shield, it's also 70% damage resistant. Aside from withering gaze and destabilizing rounds, the rest of the perks in the fourth column are not nearly as relevant, but I guess there are some decent ones. One for all, hitting 3 separate targets increases damage for a moderate duration. Scoring weapon hits against 3 separate enemies within 3 seconds of each grants 35% increased damage for 10 seconds. Does not require direct hits. So honestly, not too bad on the Lotus Eater sidearm, but honestly, it makes way more sense to just get destabilizing rounds or Withering Gaze to really play into those void synergies. High Ground is just a worse one for all because it's only a maximum of 25% at 3 stack compared to one for all, which is 35% increase in damage. So if you do just want a pure damage increase, one for all is way better than High Ground here. So Reverberation actually sounded fairly interesting at first because it increases blast radius to 100 for 5.5 seconds. Unfortunately, I just didn't find this to be that good at all. It's like, okay, there's more blast radius, but it's not like things were dying from that blast at all. So that's kind of why I ended up preferring velocity, mainly because, if my initial projectile hits a target and I'm able to then, proc destabilizing or mainly destabilizing, that's a little bit better than having a greater blast radius on the initial projectile. Adrenaline Junkie is here. This weapon gains increased damage and handling from final blows with grenades or this weapon. Weapon kills grant 1 stack of Adrenaline Junkie for 4.5 seconds. Grenade kills grant all 5 stacks instantly, even if the weapon is stowed. So that makes it slightly better than High Ground at the high end, but still worse for one for all, and it's slightly more annoying to proc. I guess getting a grenade kill is not the most difficult of tasks, but one for all is higher and the activation requirement is still fairly easy. You just have to hit 3 separate enemies. In the third column, Obviously, repulsor brace, as previously discussed, is the obvious choice when you're going for a destabilizing or withering gaze. Personally, from just my minor testing, I do prefer withering gaze and repulsor brace together. Having that overshield makes a little bit more sense if you want to play into that more support playstyle. Oh, and one thing I should definitely mention is repulsor brace, honestly, in like lower tier content doesn't make as much sense. Like, sure, it's nice to have the overshield, but most of the time it's like you really don't need it. So in lower tier content, it is kind of, it's nice to have, like, don't get me wrong, but I do think that you could definitely trade this out for a few other perks depending on what you are doing. So strategist honestly isn't terrible. Final blows with this weapon generates class ability energy. Activating your class ability briefly improves this weapon's stability. You mainly care about that class ability energy generation. So if you are on a build that cares about class ability energy, strategist is not a terrible option. Feeding Frenzy, each rapid kill with this weapon progressively increases reload speed for a short time. Weapon kills grant 1 stack of Feeding Frenzy for 3.5 seconds, increasing the reload speed of the weapon. So at the top end, you do get 100 reload speed stat and a 0.8 times reload duration multiplier. Honestly, it's okay, but I mean, the reload speed on this thing, while not great, isn't like the most problematic part of the weapon. Shoot to loot, shooting an orb of power picks it up, shooting an ammo brick picks it up and automatically reloads all of your equipped weapons from reserves. Not a bad perk, but apparently it's not working properly on this weapon or apparently any of the other rocket sidearms. So while decent in theory, because ideally the explosion from the rocket projectile would interact with the weapon bricks or the orbs of power to just pick it up and instantly reload the gun, it doesn't work or interact properly. I don't know if this is actually a bug or if this is how the weapon is intended to function. That's a bit unclear. So possibly this might be good in the future, but for now, it's seemingly just a completely avoid. Reconstruction, this weapon slowly reloads itself over time up to double capacity. Every 6 seconds while not firing the weapon, loads 10% of the magazine capacity, rounded up into the magazine from reserves. Can overfill the magazine up to double the normal capacity, works even while stowed. This isn't too bad of a perk if you mainly want to use it as a secondary weapon, but as a primary, I still ended up having to reload many times during the Grandmaster Nightfall. So it kind of did its job because I had to reload less, but I still had to play cover many times and I had plenty of opportunity to reload. So honestly, with destabilizing rounds, I guess it's okay if you just want to use it as a secondary special weapon, but since I was trying to use it as my primary weapon, I didn't find it all that completely useful, to be honest. I do think it is pretty good if you are, like I said, going to be using Lotus Eater as a secondary. You're out here using the primary, mainly switching to your heavy, then you're pulling out your secondary Lotus Eater, do some ad clear, boom, 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 hit a couple shots. Maybe if you pair it with Withering Gaze, you can target, and then you can always make sure you get those weekends. You never have to worry about reloading. If you really hate reloading, honestly, it does its job. But if you do plan on using it as a primary, it's like, it works, but it's not the greatest thing. Now, beacon rounds, I find kind of maybe a bit underrated. Final blows with this weapon grant your projectiles tracking and increase reload speed. Dealing further damage extends the duration. Kills with the weapon grant a stack of beacon rounds for 6 seconds, maximum of 4 stacks. Scoring further hits with the weapon can extend the buff duration up to the maximum amount of 4 seconds. Buff can be activated while stowed. Each stack grants increased projectile tracking. Projectile tracking is only in effect while the targeted reticle is active. Grants the following while you have active stacks: 15 reload speed, 0.9 times reload duration multiplier, and a 45% increased auto aim cone size. Honestly, in my testing, it just let me be a bit more consistent, which in terms of when pairing it with destabilizing rounds, just allowed me to be more consistent with volatile. Sure, you just be like skill issue, just aim better, but there's plenty of times where you just don't have the time to aim completely and you just have to aim in a general direction. And honestly, when you have beacon rounds, I found that my shots just hit that much more consistently and with, some of the velocity perks, honestly, it felt pretty good, especially with the reload speed increase. When I was reloading at max stacks, it basically felt like, oh, there was like no reload here even. It was like, it was happening real quick. So honestly, beacon rounds, kind of underrated. So for my personal Lotus Eater Adept role that I ended up with, that I think is pretty decent. Linear Compensator, High Explosive Ordnance. I did decide to go for that over Alloy Magazine, although Alloy Magazine isn't terrible. I guess it's even when paired with like beacon rounds, it could be even faster on that reload. But High Explosive Ordnance, I mean, I'm not really itching for that, extra ammo. It's like, is it annoying to lose that or to have that magazine size decrease? Sure, but the increase in blast radius and slightly increase in projectile speed to velocity is pretty decent. IMO, I think the trade-off in my playstyle is kind of worth it. Repulsive Brace, pretty good. Get the overshield and beacon rounds. Honestly, when I'm not going to GMs, to be honest, I like Repulsive Brace makes sense in like GM content and like maybe when I'm doing like solo dungeons or something. But honestly, beacon rounds really, really does make the weapon feel a little bit better and just that much smoother to operate. And for my skin here, I have on the Nebula Rose. Honestly, Lotus Eater, like the yellow and green default Adept skin looks ugly as all hell. The original Vanguard blue and orange just looks so much better. I can't believe the Adept skin just looks like complete trash when compared to the original skin. But yeah, I wanted to make sure I leaned into what I thought would make sense to fit into like a Lotus Eater theme. And, pairing it with Void, it is a Void element. Highlighting you get a lot of purple accenting the weapon, and it's nice and shiny, and it looks pretty good. So there we go. Oh yeah, and all my Lotus Eaters are bugged at saying enemies defeated 83, and dim they were all at 0. Previously, they were like in the thousands at initial drop. Like they had like thousands of kills when obviously, they're brand new drops. It's like, well, that's not possible. So that's a pretty funny bug that's completely inconsequential, but I guess it could be really annoying if you really care about, tracking your kills. Let me know how your rolls went in the comments down below. And also let me know, are you team blast radius or team velocity?